Welcome to another episode of the Business of Speed podcast. I'm Steve Breitenstein here with Nick Breton. We're excited to bring another episode here in the third season. Just recently, this week alone, I was able to see Nick down in New Orleans as we were passing through with the work I'm doing with Winning Leader and Jeremy Boone. We had some business in Baton Rouge, so we were able to take the extra hour and 15 minutes drive down, see Nick, then drive right to the airport, get on a flight, and head right back to Chicago. But it was fun to actually see a friend, somebody that I work with now for 3 years. Regularly, we see each other and talk, but it's always fun to kind of see each other in person. So that's a big change. But Nick, how are things going for you?
Things are good down here. This is the best time of the year to live in Louisiana. So it's 70 degrees and sunny and beautiful, and so things are good. The business is good. Everything is busy, and so it was good to see you last week. Catch up with Jeremy, and so. Glad you guys had a good time of the year to come down. That will change if you decide to come down in July, August, or September.
Oh, man. I was just telling Nick off air that I might be coming back down in June. So I know I'll get hit a little bit harder then, but I love it. It was like 75, 80 while we were there. And then I came home and it was a tornado warning and there was 22 degrees or snow. So my body couldn't figure out what was happening to it. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for today's episode, we wanted to kind of build a little bit on some of the ideas we've been talking about with the speed side, where we were talking about block starts. We were kind of challenging the idea of coming out of that block start position, even a 40 stance. We're at the time of the year where the 40-yard dashes are going on right now for the NFL Combine. And you're seeing lots of videos of guys coming out, good starts, bad starts, good transitions, not great transitions. Some guys look fantastic, but run bad times. Some guys run really good times and look terrible to us as we're watching it. Everybody's kind of a freak in that regard. But the piece that we've been focusing on that we really find interesting and valuable and challenging is the idea of the hip flexors and the role that they're playing in that start, in that transition, and eventually when we're at full speed in our top end speed positions. And Nick was kind of playing with some ideas about what is the hip flexor role really in maximizing stride length. And by maximizing, I mean finding the ideal, not just wildly creating the longest stride length possible. But Nick, can you expand a little bit on kind of what you've been seeing and what you've been thinking about with that idea?
Yeah, so last week we talked a little bit about, some of the exercises that we had kind of played with, some of the thoughts that we had. I've started implementing a few things, and in just a week or 2 weeks time, I like the feel that the athletes are getting from it. I can't say that I'm necessarily seeing a huge impact right away. If anything else, it's helping them to understand what I'm looking for. And so, one of the other topics that this has brought up with us when our athletes are going through this is stride length throughout the acceleration and how that changes and how we adjust and the other things that are impacted by that. And so, just to give you some context into those conversations, one of the things that we talk about is how long within the run or the distance the stride stays a little shorter, a little choppier, when it begins to lengthen, what's happening to the rest of the body. And so, one of the things that we're seeing a lot with our high school athletes is, our girls are able to maintain that short, choppy, quick stride for 3, 4, potentially 5 strides before they really start lengthening out, where our guys are going to be a little bit longer, especially our strong, football player-esque type guys. They're going to be able to maintain that quick burst within their stride rate for 5, 6, maybe even 7 strides. And so looking at that, and then as they begin to make their transition, really helping them with, okay, as we go through this, as the stride is starting to lengthen and the body position is starting to change, what is going on? And one of the things that we see a lot, and I don't know if we've talked about this in the podcast or not, is athletes who don't have good control of their core, the integrity throughout their core, and what it does to their hips, their ability to really bring their hips through and get them in a good stacked position under the shoulders. And that's what we've been working a lot on lately, is being able to transition that entire torso with the hips in order to get into a good upright position. And so, to start off with, I know in the acceleration, this can be something that's really hard to coach, just because you don't know whether you want to throw something out there that's going to adjust their strides, or is it more of a subjective coaching cue that you're giving them? I know that there are like acceleration ladders out there, and people will use different distances that are already set, or coaches will set up cones and you have to accelerate over the top of the cones. But I'm not really a big fan of that, only because it's almost like prescribing certain loads in the weight room. You never know how your athlete is going to show up to you. And every athlete is a little bit different. So if you set up an acceleration ladder for 3 guys, well, all 3 guys really need a different distance. And so I don't like having things that we need to step over. I would rather say, hey, listen, let's do a 3-step burst or a 5-step burst. Okay, I want you to do the same thing again, but I want you to think about the first 2 or 3 steps being completed in this smaller space. Or I want you to think about getting a bigger punch through the ground, which carries you out a little bit further. So talking about a bigger projection. So helping them more understand the concepts as opposed to just telling them where to place their feet.
Yeah, I love that. It's hard to individualize, especially when you have large groups. That's where it gets always the bigger challenge, is to say like, oh man, I'm going to mark where each of you should be going. And that is where in the past we used those Vince Anderson speed ladder ideas of where the steps should take. And then we actually had a couple of things that we had to blow the dust off of them, but it was the actual strap that has the white markings on it. And then there's 3 different stride lengths on that we'd occasionally bring out there as a visual guide. But I think my favorite with what you're saying is to video and mark with a X or with a circle where their foot was hitting, and if it was a good ground contact that led to good projection on the next step, or if it was a bad one. And that always made a big impact with my athletes, to actually see, okay, if I go this far, my foot collapses, my heel hits. If I strike here, it's not as far as that step, but it set me up that now my next 2 were way better than that was. And that seems to be sometimes the battle, is they get excited to commit to that first step launch, but then they sabotage the next 3 in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and talking about that, it makes me think about a couple of other cases that we've had, not necessarily hip flexor specific or acceleration specific, but one of the things that we've been doing a lot of is putting sled bounding or just bounding exercises in between our accelerations and helping our athletes to understand, like, listen, you need to think as if each knee is a different polar end. They're magnets trying to repel each other. Your knees should get as far apart as they can with each stride. And so helping them to understand, like, you've got to throw one knee forward as the other one is moving back behind you, and really creating some space. Or we'll use the analogy of, it's almost like you have a pair of scissors and they're closed and you're trying to open them as fast as you can. You're trying to split the knees as quickly as possible. Helping them to understand that, this isn't necessarily a passive thing. You have to actively and forcefully drive in opposite directions. And so, I think by, again, putting some of those sled bounding drills, putting just some regular alternate leg bounding drills in, that's helped some of our athletes to understand as they move through the acceleration, they get to steps 6, 7, 8, or 8, 9, and 10 to really be able to create a little more projection with each stride.
Yeah. Have you guys ever taken it and gotten to this level where it's single leg bounds with the sled?
With the sled? No, we have not done it with the sled before.
Yeah. I have played with that. It's so hard to find an athlete that can handle it because it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging. But the idea of it, I always liked, for that speed of your hip flexor to be able to snap that foot through. Because in hopping, which was what we're describing, single leg bounding would be hopping. You have a tendency to really be a toesy type landing. Where on bounding, you usually get a little bit more flat footed, full foot contact. And the angle of that for that hopping doesn't always equate really what you want from sprinting. So it becomes really just a hip flexor exercise and the ground contact. But the sled allows a little bit of control, I would say, through the upper body to really work it. But as I'm thinking about it, something I've never done is really just like a single leg switch in place with a sled where I'm just holding that angle, but my other leg's just in the air and I'm trying to do like a a single leg tuck in place to just work that hip flexor and see if I can take a little body weight out of it, but really work that speed and that angle back into the ground.
Yeah, yeah. As I think about that, I think a sled might be a little bit too heavy for some of the athletes that we work with. Have you ever done it with a band, kind of like a band resisted single leg bound?
I haven't. No, that
Okay,
would probably be a pretty good
because
challenge.
I like that idea. I like that idea of getting
Yeah.
into that angle, getting that really fast reciprocation. But
Yeah.
again, with some of our lighter athletes, I mean, our sleds alone are already 80, 90 pounds. And so pushing that
Yeah.
on the turf, I don't know they have the strength to do that.
That's tough.
Unless we even just did it in place. But yeah, that might be something that I try with some of the bands
Yeah.
because I like that idea of understanding that reciprocation in that angle.
Now, similar to that, without doing just the hop, I have done a lot of heavy resisted single leg fast leg, where the other leg is on the ground straight, like you're doing a
Mm-hmm.
straight leg shuffle, and then it's just a right leg fast leg drill, and
Yeah.
then creating an angle from that.
Mm.
I've done that a lot, and I like the way that one looks and the response it gives. Now, programming wise, I've never really used that one as I'm going to program this out for 4 weeks.
Right.
That it always felt more of we were struggling with one side was just being a little odd that day on the 1080, especially when we were able to evaluate what kind of like force curves they had. And it was kind of like that rhythm of right leg has a good spike, left leg is just kind of catching, right leg is
Yeah.
fast. That would be my go-to is, all right, we're going to do left leg, just single leg, fast leg action. Still resisted, still at an angle, but you got to get yourself to go just with your left leg snapping through quick to push through the ground. And then you'd come back and sprint. And it just got that one hyper aware, I would say, nervous system wise, to get a little bit more out of it. And it would regularly make an improvement in the way that graph looked.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So those all kind of are the same ideas, probably on some sort of continuum of ability there, but that would be probably the easiest version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. Gets my wheels turning a little bit.
Yeah. So I think like that would be something definitely going on in the early sprinting to transitional phase.
Right.
But then as we kind of come through that transition, things get a little weird sometimes for the athletes as far as what the stride is going to look like then. And right now I'm working strictly with a soccer team on the most
Mm-hmm.
part. And the soccer team, I mean a soccer club. I have about 55 athletes that I'm seeing, female and male athletes. Soccer has a huge tendency, from my eyes, that they are short and choppy with their strides. They're heavily backside. They never open up at all. And so we've really been spending a lot of time just hammering that they've got to get up in front of themselves and they got to run a little bit more efficiently. But there's been no one size fits all to what happens with their stride, honestly, as they come through that transitional phase. It's not that they all become choppy. Some are big, some are just low and flat and really long. Some are just choppy the whole way, some are backside. So when we're talking about transitioning, can you elaborate a little bit on like what you've seen a lot recently as they transition into top end speed, what's happening with their strides?
Yeah, well, this time of the year is really a time where, we're taking a lot of agility based athletes and we're trying to fit them into track.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we have a lot of athletes that are not used to running in a true top end speed position. We have a lot of athletes that are always getting ready for a breakdown. They're always getting ready for some type of reaction or change of direction. And so they never allow themselves to really create the hip height that they need. And so this is a time of the year where we're spending a lot of time just teaching athletes how to elevate above the ground. And it can feel very odd to them because they feel like they have less control. There's less of their foot that's touching the ground. They're spending more time in that flight phase. And so if you ask them to break down from there, they wouldn't be able to, or they definitely wouldn't be able to quickly. And so it's really trying to help them understand, what is this going to feel like? What are the differences in the positions that we're getting into? And what should we really be focused on? And so, a lot of times what we are trying to help them understand is like this feeling of being bouncy, this feeling of creating time in the air, creating a little more flight and creating less work on the ground. One of the things our interns are getting ready to go through their linear speed segment for the internship. And this is a time where we really talk about like, okay, what are the factors that limit our speed, and what prevents us from continuing to hold and maintain that speed? And one of the biggest factors is friction and the amount of time that we're on the ground. If we can create less of that time in a 100-meter sprint or a 200-meter sprint, then we're going to be able to run faster. And so, as this applies to our athletes, helping them to understand, like, our whole goal is not to touch the ground. We want to create as much distance between each step as we can. And so creating exercises and drills where they can be a little more bouncy, where they can spend a little more time in that position, whether it's something like a wicket run, where they're running over the top of something. Maybe it's a drill where they're holding a med ball out in front or a PVC up overhead, or where we just slow the movement down and we tell them, hey, listen, you're going to go through a jog, but I want you to purposefully try to create more time between each stride. Okay. I want you to actually create more of this bounce and lift that we're looking for. And then we'll speed it up a little bit and help them understand that it is okay that you're going to feel like you're a little out of control when we're going through this.
Yeah. I love that. That cueing recently with the soccer club was, I want you to feel like it's hard to stop. It's easier to just keep on going. And that's kind of a good feeling of I'm running pretty efficiently in top end speed, is that the effort doesn't feel like I'm really trying super hard to keep going. It's that natural bounce and the cyclical rhythm to it just kind of leads me right into that next step. Have you guys found that, like, your straight leg shuffles, your straight leg bounds, does that help in aiding that idea of being kind of bouncy and tall off the ground?
It really just depends on how we teach it. Sometimes when we teach that straight leg bound or shuffle, the athletes want to, again, be very physical with the ground. They want a lot of surface area touching the ground. They want to make the steps really long. If we can, again, cue them to be bouncy, to be quick off the ground, to use the front of the foot a little bit more, then they start to conceptualize and understand that a little bit better. But again, with that focus on, we want you to continue to be light as you go through this and spend more time in the air than you're spending on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. The idea of like a crescendoing action. Right. You're not violently just trying to explode off the jump. Let yourself go from a gentle kind of just popping back and forth where your body feels itself going up and down, up and down. And now every step, let's just get a little higher, a little further, and try to be a little quicker, and just feel that build up of intensity as you're going versus just violently ripping at the ground.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. And it's funny when they actually find this position too, because they recognize it almost right away, and you can tell, and you really don't even have to say anything, because they understand that feeling of, okay, I've now lost control and I can feel that I'm a little bit quicker. And this, and another thing that's really important here is you should never have athletes doing this side by side, because when they're doing it side by side, they're always equating it to a race. They're always equating it to what's going on with the person beside them. They're always in comparison. And so when that happens, they're always going to go back to what they know, because they're confident in that. They know they're fast in that. And there is some sense of normalcy to them. And so when we have athletes that are exploring movement and exploring different positions, they need to be able to do that on their own. And so if I'm in a team setting and we're doing this, we're going to specifically space everybody way out, or start them on different lines on a football field, or put them in more of like a waterfall type action. Because again, if they're side by side, they're never going to let go enough. They're never going to be relaxed enough in order to put themselves through this properly.
Yeah, I totally agree. The phrase that I say is, if you finished first, you did it the worst. And that goes through like all of our warm-ups and anything where it's just like ankle jumps, if it's straight leg shuffles. And like the idea is not to just rush through and then look at me with pride that you finished first.
Right.
That's not what we're trying to do. It's to do it the best that you possibly can. So that is a phrase we use. Now, just last night, I have to, because of the facility we have, it's a pretty short straightaway. So we've been doing some J accelerations to allow us just a little bit more time to build up, because we got a pretty wide space, just it's not very long. So we make a nice little J. And the guys I was working with to finish up the group, which was about 16 soccer players. They all said at the end that they loved doing the J runs. And I was like, why? It's the thing that I like coach them the hardest on,
Yeah.
is because they don't get up tall. And like, it's fun to just open up and feel it. And last night was probably the best they've looked. We are at our 8th session we've done together because we only train once a week, but they look dramatically different in that top end speed piece, which we're only able to capture about 8-9 yards of top speed for them. But it was amazing to see that hammering every single session a variation of that top end speed. The verbiage is always around getting our foot up in front of our body, bouncing off the ground. They look better 8 sessions in, noticeably objectively better.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, and it changes everything for them. You know, instead of this straight acceleration where they're really trying to get after it, it's more of a build up. And just the curve alone makes the drill feel so much different. I mean, in track, that's why that's not the sole reason, but one of the things that we do a lot of is 120s and 150s off a curve. And so, you know, I can tell you, it feels completely different than doing a 120 or a 150 starting in a straightaway and going into a curve. And so, you know, it gives you a little more relaxation going into it. It's almost a little more like a buildup than a hard acceleration.
Mm-hmm. And so they've really enjoyed it. So
good.
I'm happy to hear that. You never know what drills are really going to stick with your teams. And I think over the years, you see that certain sports gravitate towards different drills.
Yeah.
And it's not because it necessarily feels sports specific sometimes. It's sometimes because it's the complete opposite of what they do in their sport. And so for the soccer kids, they have not expressed enjoying any of the change of direction stuff we're doing, because I think that they're doing a lot of similar things in soccer in their small space things here in the Midwest, like Chicagoland. The soccer guys are not getting outside right now. It's too cold. They recently had a tournament in Vegas that they won, so that was a good objective measurement for that. But all of it's on basketball courts, small-sided soccer. And so they're constantly in these agility type positions. We're working the mechanics of it and talking concepts, but for them to just open up, they're pretty excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
So I love that.
Yeah.
So Nick, I wanted to kind of lean in now with our business piece. We've got a lot of moving parts going on. Myself changing dramatically what my business kind of looks like. No longer in a facility on my own entity. BSP is always evolving and growing in different ways and capacities. But we were talking off air about you still need to be able to reflect every now and then and cast a bit of a vision for what the business can be. What do you want it to be? How is it going to impact us? And, you know, for me, mine is a bunch of vision right now because I'm not getting caught in the weeds at all with managing, which is fantastic. I've had 2 incidences that I had to take care of while I was out of town as far as people not being there on time, which is a 180-degree turn from what I was doing previously in my role as director of coaching. It felt like I was spending all day in the weeds, just fixing stuff, scheduling, taking care of things. For you, as you're entering what'll be kind of we're kind of coming towards the end of the first quarter of business. Where are you at mentally in this space of my vision for this space versus managing day to day?
Yeah. You know, I would say right now, due to the staffing position that we're in, I'm in a little bit more of the weeds than I would like to be. But I'm also transitioning out because we have a couple of really good individuals who are taking over things. And so that's been good. But one exercise that I'm currently going through is really looking at, you know, we talk all the time about forecasting, having a vision, looking into your future, but really looking into the future in a couple of different lenses. And so, you know, being able to say, okay, 3 years from now, what is the best case scenario? What would be a good scenario, and what would be a bad scenario? And for me, I am basically calling a bad scenario being in the same position that I'm in right now.
It's a good framework. It's a good frame.
Just from the understanding of we are growing. We are still growing. We grow every year. But if we're continuing to grow at this rate, we're not going to achieve the things that I have laid out for us. And so, really sitting down and looking at, okay, what does BSP look like if we were in an excellent scenario? How many locations? How many coaches? What type of revenue? What type of offerings? Who is in our facility as far as what other contractors? And so having an understanding of what that looks like. What is our impact outside of the facility? What teams are we looking at? What physical spaces are we taking up? Because one of the things that Steve, is if all you are doing is just filling your facility and that's the only revenue that you're driving, well, you're going to be severely impacted by that because you can only fit so many people in one facility from 4 to 8 o'clock at night every night. And that is, you got to pay the bills the other 20 hours of the day. And so what else are you doing? What else are you offering in order to make sure that you're covering that? And so really, looking at what each of those pieces look like. And again, for me, it is, okay, an excellent outlook looks like this. A bad outlook looks like where I'm at right now, with this normal growth, normal trajectory, and then also finding something that's in between. Because one thing that I find is there are times where I set goals that are probably a little too lofty, and just falling short of them, I put myself in a bad mindset. If I didn't achieve the top goal, then it's bad. Or it's a failure. And so understanding there are different levels of this, and also being able to, instead of just forecasting for the best, understanding that if I am not on trajectory for that, if I'm not on target for that, I'm on target for something else. And so I cannot scrap everything. I have to go ahead and say, okay, so for the good forecast, here's where I need to be. I'm pretty close to that. Here are some things that I need to shore up, as opposed to saying, you know what, scrap the whole thing. We're not going to make it. The other thing too is, and you're going through this as well, when you become, your own entity, when you become like we're an S corporation, so we're a pass through, this affects me, personally as well. And so I have to understand, like, okay, what do I want my life also to look like? As far as, that could be income, that could be time away from the facility, that could be, how much input I have on the facility as opposed to what other, who else is having input on the facility and how it's moving, how it's impacting my own personal life as far as where, when do I need to be and where do I need to be there from a day-to-day and even week-to-week standpoint. And so, really starting to think about, okay, as my daughter gets older, how much time do I want to be able to allocate to her? Because, I can tell you right now, if she had sports and she had games and she had things that I need to be at or we need to travel, I don't have the capacity to do that as much as I would like to. And so I want to make sure that I create the type of life that I want for that. And so, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and being able to work back from that to say, okay, if in 2027, this is where I want to be, this is where I need to be in 2026 and 2025 and each quarter of 2024.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, what you're describing really is that idea of when you are leading a facility or leading a team of guys, even leading yourself to a degree, you've got to start and create that future, come back to the present, and then guide the path there. What happens to a lot of us when we're in the weeds, as we say, right? When you're not aware enough that you're in the weeds, is you start just tossing out some loose ideas for the future and just hoping that by grinding away today, you'll somehow end up there.
Right.
And it never works. That's when you're just in managing mode and you really are just caught getting through days, getting through weeks. There's no time that you're going to be ahead of things. You just will not be, because you're not aware enough of what's going around. You got to step back and take that big 50,000 foot view of how these moves today are going to affect the future. And your no's become hard when you're in that manager space, because it's like, oh, I just need this. Oh yeah, yes to this, yes to that. I'll take that. We'll do that. But none of it's leading you in a direction that you want it to be going. And Nick, that last piece you touched on with how is this going to affect my day to day, and what do I want it to look like? There's a weird push and pull in my life right now, because I'm moving full time into this other space that I am super excited about. and want to do an amazing job in that. And there's fantastic opportunity in that space. The coaching side continues to be there. And very quickly, I dangerously could commit to too much in the coaching space. Very quickly. With just my name, my reputation, there are like 4 or 5 people around talking to me about possible coaching opportunity stuff. But I don't want to be too excited about that stuff and just start saying yes, because all of a sudden I've stretched myself too thin. And now I have to constantly have other coaches helping me cover things. And now I'm running this other small business that's going to be a distraction to what I really want to be doing. And so it's kind of an interesting place that I'm at as far as having to really think about what is my desirable commitment to this and what am I willing to invest into it in order to have the type of life that we are hoping to be having right now.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I think is so important is you're very confident and adamant about what's important and what you're willing to do. And that is, and I, like you just talked about, and I've gone through this in the past, you get so excited when you're, casting vision and thinking about growth, you get so excited about where you see that you could potentially go that you start doing all these things and it starts detracting from what you first started out doing. And so, as a bit of advice, what I would recommend to, young coaches or people just getting into the business is being very, very steadfast and, okay, where do I want to go? What do I see myself doing? Because one of the things that I've realized is if the opportunity came up one time, it will always be available.
Yeah.
And so, you can turn some opportunities down now, knowing that if you went back to them in a year, there would still be a level of interest there. You're never burning a bridge. If they have a desire for you now, they'll have a desire for you in the future. And so, just understanding that, and they will appreciate that you are in a better foundational position when you do take them on a year from now than if you were to take them on right now. Because you take them on now and they see that level of clutter, they see that level of disorganization, that could be a bridge that you potentially burn. And so to be able to really put yourself in a good position if you do decide to take that on is immensely more beneficial for both parties.
Yeah. Nick, have you found when you are evaluating those opportunities, let's say, as an example, I want to have 2 facilities. Like we always we talk about opportunities that come away. I know through my years at TC Boost, there were countless other facilities that wanted to kind of have a relationship with us and have 4 or 5 different locations. In the conversation, we always had to keep front of mind, what is that going to change for you as the owner or the director as far as your day-to-day goes? And if you're saying a priority is I want to be able to have a little bit more time at home, I want to be able to a little bit more control of my schedule and where I'm actually making my impact, you may have forgotten what it took to get that other facility going the first time around. And you're like, oh, the second one will kind of take care of itself. But how important is that for you right now? Because it shifts. Before kids, you're like, man, I just want this thing to grow and I want it to be churning. But now, are you evaluating it through a different lens of like, this is really a priority is my life? And so, although it'd be awesome to take that opportunity, what I really want is growth so that I can hire another coach. I can step back away. I can operate and just kind of lead this facility versus being in it all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes down to also, just like we were talking about with casting vision and having, both an excellent option, a poor option, understanding that if you decide to go to a second location, it may not be able to take care of itself. It may not, be able to, especially early on. And so, I think it is when you're looking at those opportunities, can you step away from them if you need to? When you go into them, have you created enough of a support? Have you created enough of a foundation to be able to expand into that? So if we take the specific example of moving into a second facility, before you ever think about that, you have to think about, do we have the staff that would be able to split to go there? Do we have the processes that we would be able to put in place, the systems that we would use when we get into that? Do we have the connections that we need to be able to build that? Because now you have hindsight. You have your history in opening a first location. So you have to truly learn from what you did in the first one and capitalize that in the second. But also, do you have the revenue to cover two facilities? And so, I would never go into a second location if the first one could not fund the second one, because again, you don't know what it's going to look like. You and I talked about it when you were in town. We talked about, just business and being able to know where everything is at and how the year unfolds. And one of the things that I talked to you about is I never realized how bad February can be. Because in the city of New Orleans, like, one, it's a shorter month. So you have 28 days to make the same amount of money that you normally make in 31 days. I have to deal with Mardi Gras. And so there are at least 10 days where clients are not going to want to train. So now I took a 31-day month down to an 18-day month, and I have to try and create the same amount of revenue in that amount of time where no one is thinking about training or working out. All they want to do is have a good time. So, similarly, if you're looking at a second location, you're looking to make a move, you're looking to do a side hustle, there are going to be times where you're not going to be able to predict what is coming. There are going to be, slower times to it. And you've got to make sure that you have, enough of a foundation, enough wherewithal, enough in reserves to be able to continue you through those moments until you get back to, the good times.
Yeah. Nick, I think that's super insightful. I know we got to wrap up because we got a couple commitments that we got to get to after this. But I want to encourage anyone that is listening and has been thinking about that second location, has been thinking about that move into their own private space where they're going to be doing their own thing as an entity. Reach out and let's talk through that. It helps always. Nick is investing in himself to kind of go out to a business conference, even as what we would say is running a very successful facility down in New Orleans. It still pays to reach out and to ask questions, hear other people's story, and get their thoughts on what they're hearing from your story, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference. So as always, we appreciate you guys listening. Reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to have conversation. We'll talk to you guys soon.